welcome everybody to this special event. This is kind of Chevalier's Books, the East Coast feed. Ordinarily, for those folks who are in Los Angeles, we do this at 7 o'clock Western time. After the conversation, we hang around with wine and cheese and keep the author captive, so all the questions that couldn't be asked are still able to be asked. This is an event I've been looking forward to for quite some time. And let me introduce who the participants are and tell you why I'm kind of excited about it and why I think together the book DADITUDE and the book YOGI by Jon Pessah make the perfect Father's Day present together. Particularly if you buy it at Chevalier's Books in Los Angeles. Chris Erskine has been for circa 30 years a mainstay of the Los Angeles Times, sports writer, editor, and then toward the latter part of his career, he wrote an indispensable column called The Middle Ages, in which he shared his life, his family, the experiences that he had. And on Saturday morning, when the newspaper dropped at 5:30, I would rush out to read that amazing, interesting column because we became part of his family. In addition to knowing lots about sports, he knows lots about being a dad, being a husband, loss, love, and things that really matter. And I think in a very interesting way that connects to Jon Pessah's incredible book on Yogi Berra. The Berra book, first of all, is encyclopedic, fascinating, beautifully written, and captures at least three aspects of life that I think are really important. Of course, the large piece is the life of this amazing athlete, somebody who is easily described as the best player on the best team during the 1950s when he wins 3 out of 5 MVP awards, 3 MVP awards in 5 years, leads the team to championships and the like. And so there's a lot of nostalgia and excitement in reading about the baseball piece of all of this. In addition, there is a great deal about Yogi Berra as a person and how he conducted his life and how he dealt with pressing family issues, what it was that mattered to him and how he addressed those sorts of issues as a manager, as a player, as a husband, as a father, and as the father of a son who had problems with drugs in a very public way. And I think the other aspect of this book that is clear is the notion of how the country has changed during from the 1940s to today. We are privy to conversations where Berra was a kid living on the Hill in St. Louis, how he went through life being mocked for being Italian, for how he looked, for his lack of education. I think he left the school at the 8th grade, how he dealt with his father and his responsibilities to draw the beer when his father came home from the brickyard and the like. And so it's a full picture of a man, of his career, of his family, and the country in which he lived. And it's hard to do that. And it's hard to do it well. And the final point I observe, and it's true of all athletes, and it comes across in this book, is the arc of an athlete's life is a kind of minorization of the life we all lead. because by the time Yogi Berra is in his late 30s, he's no longer Yogi Berra, he's something else. At some point when Jon has a moment, I'm going to ask him to read at page 307 of his book where he summarizes Yogi Berra on the decline. And I'm also going to ask him to read page 439, in which he puts together a few Berraisms, some Yogiisms that unfortunately is more of what people think of Yogi Berra when they hear his name. So with that overly long introduction, heck, I'm a lawyer, I can't stop talking to the jury here. I'm going to be quiet and listen to Chris Erskine and Jon Pessah talk about life and this extraordinary book. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Bert, and thank you, Jon. Thanks, everybody, for being here today. This is, I think, a great time for a book like this. Like Bert was saying, it's a big book. It's a substantial book, and there's great detail in it. And were baseball to be going full bore as it normally would this time of year, we might not have time for it. And we need it now because we don't have baseball. And although it's looking more and more like we might have a season after all. Jon, this was an exhausting thing to undertake. I mean, it was 4 years, I think. Did I read correctly that you spent researching it? Why Yogi Berra more than there were 100 guys of that era that you could have chosen who were fascinating and worthy of this? Why Yogi Berra?
One of the main reasons was he was my father's favorite player. And I listened for years and years about what a dynamic baseball player he was. And I caught Yogi starting in 1960 at the tail end of his career when he was a good role-playing outfielder. So I missed the player that my father idolized. So when I was ready to do my next book, I also wanted to do a book about somebody that I thought would be inspiring and would make people put a smile on people's face. And as soon as I said that, both my agent, my editor, and I all said Yogi Berra at the same time. So, so that's really how the idea came about. And to give you an idea just how excited Little Brown, my publisher, was, my first book, I didn't really quite know how to write a book proposal. It was 273 pages. And the proposal for Yogi Berra was 8 paragraphs. They were just really interested in an examination of Yogi's life, and it really was quite a fascinating journey.
It's a fascinating journey. Let's do what Yogi would say. Begin at the beginning. I talk a little bit about his early years. He grew up across the street from Garagiola, right. And they were best buddies, and you know, that was a pretty good neighborhood for baseball right there. Talk a little bit about what it was like for Yogi growing up on, you know, you can't kind of hardly say it, but Dago Hill in St. Louis.
Sure.
The Italian section, the working class, barely even working class. I mean,
working poor.
Right.
His father, Pietro, and Giovanni Garagiola were friends in Italy. They came to America a year apart, took different paths, but settled in St. Louis across the street from each other. And Joe and Yogi met when Yogi was 5 and Joe Garagiola was 4. And Garagiola always said that he didn't know a day in his life when Yogi Berra wasn't his best friend. And the two of them were inseparable. Yogi, for all of the famous sayings and for all of the stories about how he talked on the field, which he did, talk to the umpire, talk to the players, talk to anybody that would talk to him, off the field, quiet to the point of being shy. So Joe did the talking, and they played. I mean, they grew up during the Depression. They played from night until the whistle blew at the factory where both their fathers worked, and they knew when that whistle blew, they had to run home and get a bucket of ice and run to the tavern and have it filled with beer, waiting for him. And if it wasn't waiting for their fathers, they knew what they would get. But I had the great opportunity to speak to 3 of his friends growing up. They still live on the Hill, which was almost exclusively Italian. And they said Yogi was always the best athlete in any game that he played. Anything he picked up, he could do. He was the organizer, though Joe was the talker. And he was just a lot of fun to be around. And one of the really interesting things, and tells you a lot about Yogi's athleticism, which is his brothers, who eventually, all good ball players, all who were prevented from taking up offers from teams because the father said, games of 4 boys, you're a man, you go to work. They kind of like held the line, said they would work for some extra shifts and bring in some money, let Yogi play baseball. They said they told their little brother, if you want to play baseball, it's easier to make it if you're a left-handed hitter. Yogi was a right-handed hitter.
Because he was a switch hitter. He was a swich hitter.
He turned around, hit left-handed.
Just hit from the other side.
And just like it was nothing. And his friends said that when they would play at school, the right field, the school was about 280 feet. And Yogi, even as a teenager, could hit the ball that far. And since they only had one ball during the Depression, if he got a hold of one, it was on the roof. So they begged him to bat right-handed. So this way he hit the ball over the left fielder's head, but at least they could still have a ball when they finally ran it down.
There's a great scene in the book. There's a great scene in the book, in fact, that you alluded to, was when Dad says, you're not going to play baseball anymore. You're going to, you're going to get a job. You're going to, he wants to drop out of school. He wants to play baseball. So they have a family meeting, and his older brothers, it's a great sort of a cinematic moment where the older brothers go, I'll take on extra hours. I'll work nights so Yogi can play baseball. Yeah.
I mean, Yogi knew it was pretty serious too, because the parish priest was there. The principal of the school was there. And the head YMCA were there. And Pietro just kept saying, you can't play baseball. You can't play baseball. And the parish priest said, it's good that you want to play baseball, but it's time to go to work. And Yogi was just insistent that I can make it as a Major League Baseball player.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he always gave credit to his brothers. His oldest brother, Tony, and Yogi always said was the best player in the family. So he must have been awfully good. He just, he got the chance. What he used to, when he went to work, he would go to work and, about 2:00, 2:30, when kids got out of school, Yogi would say, hey, it's been nice, and just walk out the door. And he would get fired. He was fired from like 5-6 jobs, which did not put him in good standing with his father. But he really believed in himself as a ball player. And, lucky for us, who are certainly Yankee fans, he was right.
Yeah. How did you get that kind of detail? How did you get, it was like being in the living room with the Berra family when they're having the family meeting, and the detail of that. How did you get that?
Well, like I said, there were 3 people there who grew up with him from the time he was 5-6 years old. And it was a very close-knit community. Everybody knew everybody else. And I also, one of my best sources was Carmen Berra, his wife of 65 years. Carmen Berra's sister, Bonnie, who still lives in St. Louis. And, she certainly heard the family history. That story was told inside the family over and over and over again. So, she knew all the details of that, as did her oldest son, who was Yogi's godson, Steve Mahfood. And so there were still a lot of people on the Hill who were thankfully alive and knew Yogi very well, who were able to tell me just great stories about him. And also what it was like. My first book started in 1990. This book starts, Yogi's born in 25. He's grows up during the Depression. I have no idea. I've heard stories. But one of the stories that really stuck with me was when they told me that they used to chase the truck from the market to the city dump. And they'd have their penknives in their pockets, and they'd go through the rotted fruit and vegetables, and they'd find the places that were still fresh and not rotted, and that would be their treats for the week. That's
depression. That's the Depression era.
That's the Depression. Very different life.
That's phenomenal. Talk a little bit about how I always thought one of the great things that made him such a great spokesman, such a hit with fans, was just his name, Yogi Berra, which was Lawrence's given name.
So his name is Lawrence Peter Berra. His
Right.
mother, who understood English but only spoke Italian, couldn't pronounce Lawrence, so the closest she got was Lottie. So everybody on the hill,
Which is a good nickname right there.
right there, everyone on the hill called him Lottie. And in a history-changing moment, there's a tryout for kids in the St. Louis area and across the river in Illinois at Sportsman's Park. 1,000 kids, literally 1,000 kids show up to this thing. Red Schoendienst, the Hall of Famer, second baseman for the Cardinals and Pirates, told me this great story. Of the 1,000, it came down to 8. 5 he didn't remember, but it was him, Joe Garagiola, Yogi Berra. Branch Rickey, who is looked at as the greatest talent evaluator ever, who built the idea of the farm system, is running this tryout with his scouts. And Schoendienst tells me that, he was the one who had a pitch to Yogi. And he said, I never saw anything like it. No matter where I threw it, even if it was a foot out of the strike zone, he hit it. And he goes, I'll never forget to this day. And Red was telling me this at 93, that he said, I never forgot the sound of the bat hitting the ball, the hardest I've ever heard. But Branch Rickey, for some reason, took a look at Yogi and decided that Joe Garagiola was going to be the better catching prospect, signed Garagiola, and told Yogi
for $500 signing bonus.
Wouldn't give it to Yogi, and told Yogi, I'm doing this for your own good. I think you're only going to be a AAA baseball player, and we're looking for players that go all the way. And,
Unbelievable.
And he didn't make many mistakes, but that was a big one. And so what ends up happening is Yogi then plays American Legion for 2 years. While he's in American Legion, the team goes to a movie theater, and they one of the newsreels is about India, and they see yogis. The yogis sit with their arms crossed and their legs crossed, and that's the way Yogi sat on the field before he hit. And a guy named Bobby Hoffman, who played a utility infield for the New York Giants, looked at Yogi and said, Lottie, and said, I'm going to call you Yogi from now on. And for whatever reason, it stuck, and what a gift.
What a gift that was.
What a gift, for advertising, for recognition. And he became Yogi, and it took a long time before his family finally ended up calling him Yogi. And his wife called him Yogi after their first son was born, because they named the first son Larry. And she called him Yogi, or Yog. And that's how he got his nickname.
There's a little bit of a storyline here, because Branch Rickey doesn't think he's a ball player, major league ball player. And then he goes on to be a manager. Nobody thinks he can play catcher, because he's not smart enough to call pitches.
Right.
He ends up being a great catcher. And he was when he was trying to throw runners out at second base, he was throwing curveballs. He was probably snapping his wrist a little bit, not coming over the top.
Hit an umpire in the head with the ball on one throw.
So people doubted him, and as we all know, sometimes that propels you along, right? I mean, a little bit of a chip on his shoulder.
Chris, he didn't look like a ball player. I mean, Yogi was 5'7.5" on tiptoes, had very long arms of a guy much taller, short stubby legs, thick shoulders, no neck, does not look like your prototypical athlete. So when he would show up to the minor leagues to get his uniform, they assumed that he was either there for a tryout or he was going to be the ball boy. And so, I mean, he got, that happened to him all the way up through into the major leagues. But, when he got on the field, he could hit anything. And
was he a bad ball hitter his whole career, or did he learn to?
His whole career, the
really?
which used to be called the Bible of baseball, and it was huge back in those days. Always ran polls at the end of the season. Who's the toughest? Who's the strongest hitter? Who's the fastest pitcher? And there was one category that Yogi was always in, and it was who's the toughest out. And the reason why he was the toughest out was, hey, if I throw the ball a foot outside and Yogi likes it, he's going to hit it. If I throw it in, a breaking ball inside and it's 4 inches inside, he's going to hit it. If he likes it, he's going to hit it. And he had his hand-eye coordination was just off the charts.
if he was an unlikely looking ball player, he was also an unlikely looking spokesman for all the different companies and an unlikely guest on the Ed Sullivan Show. What was it about him, do you think, that drew folks like your dad, that made him really an American icon?
Well, I mean, he was an exciting player on the field. I mean, he was, first of
Right.
all, and you would never think about this, he was fast. I mean,
Right.
no one pitched run for Yogi. You know, and late in the game, you usually pitch run for
Yeah,
a
for your
catcher.
catcher, right?
Yeah, right. He'd go first and third as well as anyone. Super quick around the plate. He was just an exciting player to watch. And with guys on base, you know, you know, they didn't keep those stats back in those days, but everybody I talked to, the pitchers I talked to said, look, this guy was like a 400 hitter with guys on base. We hated to see him come up to the plate when there was guys on base late in the game. So I think that was part of it. But I think too, the very fact that he didn't look like, I mean, you don't see Joe DiMaggio and go, I could be Joe DiMaggio. You don't see Ted Williams, you know, the statuesque player going, you know, I could be Ted Williams. But you look at Yogi Berra going, hey, he looks like me. He looks like any guy.
Right. Relatable.
I asked an advertising guy, I said, tell me why he's so good. He goes, he's accessible. Everyone just looks at him and thinks he's their friend. And there's a story that George Lois, who was like one of the advertising geniuses, one of the guys that they made Madman around. I know we're jumping around, but Quaker Oats Company owned Puss in Boots cat food. And in 1962, they come to this guy and say, we want you to do that. And the only thing we'll tell you is that women buy cat food. So Lois goes out and he gets a cat and he runs a cat around a gym and a workout. And then when he finishes his workout, he sits there and he talks about his workout with Yogi Berra. And it's, first of all, it's kind of a cutting edge 1962, a talking cat. But so he shows it to the Quaker Oats people and they go, we told you, women buy cat food, not men. You give us a baseball player. And he goes, I guarantee you all of your wives know who Yogi Berra is. So he did a focus group, total of 200 women, 180 of whom said not only that they knew Yogi and knew him well, but they trusted him. Huh. And that's advertising gold. So that's why he was, a spokesman for everything until like the last year and a half of his life. He was still doing commercials.
And he's as well known for his not non sequiturs exactly. I'm not sure how you would characterize the yogiisms that became so famous. And sometimes they sort of overshadowed him. And I think he became a little bit of a caricature because of, my favorite was, my favorite yogi saying was, nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded.
Right.
And
we kind of, it makes sense. It's like, okay, so, let's not go to that restaurant. It's too crowded. We'll take too long of a wait. But I do think, my favorite one was when you come to the fork in the road, take it. And the reason I like that one so much is that in Montclair, New Jersey, where Yogi lived, you come to a road and there's a sign and there's a rock with that inscribed on it. And what it is it's a circular road that eventually ends up in the same place on the road that Yogi lived on. So it made sense, which most of the things that he said made sense.
There was sort of a wisdom to it. I mean, it ain't over till it's over. Now, I don't know if that was really a yogiism. It ain't over till it's over, but it's true. I mean, announcers use that today because it's not over till the last out.
Right.
You don't know what's going to happen.
And, he said my first year with him, 1960 World Series, when the Yankees lost on that walk-off home run by Bill Mazeroski after outscoring the Pirates something like 50 runs.
Right.
They asked Yogi, what happened? He said, we made too many wrong mistakes. And, of course, what it meant was, they capitalized on our mistakes. He had a kind of unique way of talking, and I think one of the more accurate ones, because he didn't say all the things that were ascribed to him, was, I never said everything that I said. And I was like, okay, I can't beat him. I can't copy him, so I won't imitate him, which is another.
Did some of that come from, I mean, was Italian spoken at his home when he was growing up? Did his parents speak Italian rather than English? And so there was a little bit
so
of.
there were two, he was bilingual. And,
Right.
anyone who's spoken any of the Latin languages, and the Romance languages know that the syntax is off. So I think that had certainly had something to do
right.
with how the speech sounded a little jumbled, but in his head made perfect sense.
Well, and there was a charm to it. I mean, I think it was just captured him very well.
Well, it also got to a point where reporters would be giddy if reporters loved him,
Right.
Especially the last 40 years of his life when he was he never really left baseball. And, if they got a Yogiism, I mean, I talked to so many writers who covered him. It's like, if they were lucky enough to get a Yogiism, it was like they got gold. They just and I was like, they turned giddy. And it's like, okay, here's these cynical baseball writers. And as well as I do that baseball writers tend to be a little cynical. And when it came to Yogi, it was like, okay, that went out the window, and they were just, in love if they got a Yogiism.
Yeah. He was, unbelievably, he started out slowly as a catcher. Like we were saying, there were a lot of people who doubted he could do it. The pitchers called their own pitches early on in his Yankee career, and until he sort of developed a feel for it and earned their respect. And then he goes on to catch Don Larson's perfect game. Not only was it pitched beautifully, but it was called beautifully. I mean, he just stuck with that fastball, which was swerving a little bit at the very end, had a little movement to it at the very end, and in pinpoint control. The evolution of him as a catcher was just pretty remarkable.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the interesting things is he finishes the 1948 season with playing the last 50 games in left field. And the Yankees, who had been kind of a little bit out of the pennant race, take the Red Sox to the last day of the season before they lose. And every sports writer and Yankee management were talking about him being the right fielder. And in fact, Dan Daniel, who was a huge name in sports writing back then, wrote that we've seen Yogi Berra's last days as a catcher, and we feel good about that, and so does Yogi. And what happens is Bucky Harris is fired as manager. Casey Stengel comes in, and he brings in Bill Dickey, and Bill Dickey takes one look at him, challenges him to become a catcher, knows that he can do it, sees how athletic he is, and he just sees all these mechanical problems. He was setting up too far. He had, a catcher's supposed to catch the ball and bring it in. He would stab at the ball and take it out. Really endeared him to pitchers as they lost strikes that way. And so he didn't really have any time to develop as a pitch caller because he was having trouble, and he was throwing, again, like you said, curves to second base, and Dickey straightened out all the mechanical flaws and predicted at the end of that spring training, which he spent 2 hours every day after regular practice just working on catching, predicted that he would become not just the best, a good catcher, but the best catcher in the American League. And that's exactly what he became. And what ended up happening is Yogi had almost a encyclopedic knowledge of hitters. He could tell you how we got Al Kaline out 4 years ago with a runner on second base and this guy pitching. And so the pitchers who didn't want to pitch to him ended up relying on him completely. And I sat with Don Larson for a couple hours before an old timers game. And we talked about the perfect game among many things. And he goes, I threw 96 pitches. Yogi called every one of them. Wherever he put his mitt is where I tried to hit.
He didn't shake him off. He didn't shake him off once.
Not a single pitch.
Wow.
And wherever, if Yogi put the ball, the mitt down and away, that's where he hit. If he put it up over here, that's where he hit. And he goes, I was in the zone. Yogi was in his zone. That's why we had a perfect game.
Yeah.
A
great rhythm. We had great rhythm. Yeah. Great rhythm together. The wear and tear on a catcher. I mean, for people who know baseball only a little but love it, the wear and tear on a catcher is just enormous. I mean, people don't know the dings and and the injuries and what they go through, just the squatting for a doubleheader. And he caught a lot of doubleheaders.
I mean, Casey Stengel caught him for about a 6-7 year stretch, 141 games out of 154 games a season. And
Wow.
he caught him 20 to 22 doubleheaders each season. He would catch not just a doubleheader, but he would catch back-to-back doubleheaders in August and September. I mean, he just worked him to death. But, you know, someone once asked Casey why, especially since there were good catchers that they ended up trading, and it ended up being all-stars like Gus Triandos and Sherm Lawler, and said, you know, why do you catch Yogi so much when, you know, you got other guys? And he goes, well, I'll tell you, when I catch Mr. Berra, we win World Series. And they won 10 of them. So it was pretty hard to argue with Casey on that.
Right. And like a lot of catchers, you know, who understand the game and every nuance and you know, he became a manager. Casey Stengel was probably his greatest influence as a manager, would you say?
Well, you know, I mean, Casey had a huge influence on Yogi's career. There's no question about it. And Casey was kind of the reason why Yogi ended up managing the Yankees. One of the things that I didn't know, I learned reporting this book, was that Yogi and the Yankees agreed in 1963 in spring training that Ralph Houk would step up and Yogi would would manage the team in 1964. Okay. And one of the reasons that they wanted him was because the manager that the Yankees fired after 1960 managed the Mets, and the Mets ended up coming in about 100,000 fewer fans. And so the Yankees, with all their world championships, were close to being outdrawn by a team that was losing 100 games. And the guy who was getting all the publicity was Casey Stengel. So they thought Yogi's popularity with the press was going to help at the gate. And, you know, the reality was that the Yankees, you know, were becoming an aging team. And Yankee Stadium wasn't a great place an easy place to get to. But Yogi's philosophy was kind of born of the era with the years he spent with Joe DiMaggio, which was, you know, when you were a Yankee, if you made it on the Yankees, it was assumed you knew how to play. If you didn't, they got rid of you and brought in somebody else who could play. And so Yogi looked at it as, it's my job to put you in the best position to win, and my job to set up the pitching rotation. It's your job to play the game. He was a very patient manager. He looked at I think one of his strengths as a manager was he looked at the season as a marathon, not as a sprint. Didn't put a lot of pressure on players when they were going bad. And you know what? The Yankees, you know, stumbled around in '64 and ended up winning the World Series. I mean, getting into World Series.
Going to the World Series. Right.
The Mets, 3 games over 500, the only team with that bad a record ever to make it to the World Series. They end up winning the NL East. They beat the Big Red Machine, and they're up 3 games to 2 on one of the best teams in history, the Oakland A's, who go on to win that World Series and then another, so win 3 straight World Series. So, you know, his style of managing turned out to be very successful.
In '64, what a test for him, because he's managing a bunch of guys, a guy named Mickey Mantle, who could be a bit of a handful. I mean, he had tell everybody about the great speech that Yogi had planned for spring training. And then Mantle,
you know,
this is good. This is Mickey Mantle to a T, right?
Mickey Mantle comes up in 51, a 19-year-old from Commerce, Oklahoma, population, 3,000, and Yogi takes him under his wing. Yogi's 7 years older than Mantle, and they become very good friends. In fact, Yogi tried to get Mantle off of drinking as hard as he did, and sadly failed. Whitey Ford, also, a great friend, big part of Ford's success was having Yogi as a catcher. They were known to break a curfew or two. And so there's Yogi, and he's kind of nervous, that he knows he's managing his friends. He knows he's managing his teammates. It's always hard when you come up through the ranks. And the very first day, he's going through a speech that he practiced with Bobby Richardson, the second baseman, and his wife the night before, about, it's kind of like, it was supposed to be funny, all right. He starts setting rules. No no drinking, no stay, here's a curfew,
No golf, no fishing, no
golf, no
anything.
going to the dog track during spring training. And about after the third or fourth no, Mickey Mantle stands up, he goes, "That's it," throws the bat down, says, "I quit," walks out. Everyone breaks up laughing. And, a seasoned manager, probably just takes that right in stride and works with it. But this is Yogi's first day as the manager of these people. And it was hard. It took him a good half a season or more before he finally, got over the fact that these guys were his friends. And they tested him. And they
the harmonica scene is one of my favorites with a guy by the name of Phil Linz. They've lost 4 straight. They're getting on the team bus. I think they're leaving Chicago to go to Boston. I can't remember what the circumstances.
And they're stuck in traffic.
They're stuck in traffic, and Yogi's steaming that the players aren't really appreciating the fact that they've lost 4 games. Right. And from the back of the bus, he hears this harmonica music playing.
Right. Playing.
And that just flipped the circuits right there, didn't it?
Playing "Mary Had a Little Lamb." And Yogi had the whole season had not laid down the law, and the players kind of walked over him because they didn't respect him, even though he was a great player and he was their teammate. They took advantage of him, and he hears "Mary Has the Little Lamb," and Frank Corsetti, who goes back to Babe Ruth, looks at him and says, "You going to put up with that?" And he shouts back and says, "Shove that thing up your whatever." And in a little bit more colorful language than that. And
Linz doesn't hear him, and he says, "What'd he say?" And Mantle says, "Play louder."
And Mantle says, "Play louder." So he plays louder, and Yogi, who does have a temper, but they never seen it, just comes roaring down the middle of the bus. And they had, fist raised, face flush. They'd never seen this from Yogi, and and everyone's just kind of like shrinking back. And Linz tosses the harmonica to him, and he takes it and he swats it away, hits Joe Pepitone in the knee, cuts his knee. Pepitone, who
glad it was Pepitone.
The whole, his whole career was kind of a crazy kid. Starts yelling, "Oh, my knee, oh, my knee." But you know what? After that, Mantle pretty much told the team, he goes, "You know what? It's time to start playing." And from there, they went something like 34-12, end up winning the title. They're up 2-1 in the 4th game of the World Series. This is an interesting story, which I didn't know. It's 3-2. There's a double play grounder hit. Al Downing's pitching a 1-hitter. It's the 6th inning, and hits a double play grounder. Al Downing looks, thinks, okay, the inning's over. And Richardson's a Golden Glove second baseman. He reaches, doesn't get it. Ken Boyer's the next guy up and hits a grand slam, and they lose 4-3. And now it's tied 2-2. They would have been up 3-1. Yeah. On the plane ride home,
on that one pitch,
after they lose in St. Louis, he sits down with Betsy Richardson and Bobby Richardson and says, "I'm thinking about asking for a 2-year contract," because he only wanted a 1-year deal because he wanted to see if he liked managing. And he goes, "I'm thinking about asking for a 2-year deal. What do you think?" And before Bobby could say anything, Betsy says, "If Bobby hadn't messed up that double play grounder, we would have been up 3-1, and we would have won the World Series. You go in there and you ask for a 2-year contract," which is exactly the way Yogi walked in. And the minute he walked in, he saw the look on Ralph Houck and Dan Topping's face, who was one of the co-owners, and knew that there was trouble. And they said, "We're making a change." And they had already made that decision in August. And the guy that they end up hiring is the guy that beat him in the World Series, Johnny Keane.
Yeah.
And that was, I got to tell you, I was a young Yankee fan at that time. That was hard to take. We didn't, American League fans back then did not like the National League at all. Right. To have the National League manager come and manage your team, that was terrible.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
Chris,
well, this book is full of these stories. Yeah, I was just going to hand it off to the questioners because I think that I just want to say that this book is full of these kinds of great stories and detail and humanity and humor, and it's a great read, especially this summer more than any. And John, I want to congratulate you and thank Chevaliers
so I really appreciate
for doing this. And I want to turn it over to the fans.
Before Before we do, I have three small requests. One, I would like you to talk about Yogi's service to his country in the military. I would like you to talk a little bit about the relationship with Steinbrenner. And then I would like you to read from page 307, because I think it captures your beautiful writing about the aging of a sports hero and the end of a career. You can do those in any order you'd like.
I'll tell you what, Yogi plays 1 year in the minor leagues, 1943, and then he gets drafted and he joins the Navy. And Yogi's kind of a hyperkinetic kid. And he was bored, and they asked for volunteers for a secret mission. And it was so secret, you can't tell anyone, you can't tell your parents what it is, can't tell your parents where you're going. And what it ends up being is he volunteered for something called a rocket boat, which was a 36-foot wooden hulled ship, slab of metal on the top, 3 machine guns, 2 rocket launchers in the back. And their job was, they were the very first boat, very first edge of the invasion of Normandy. And they set up 300 yards from the shore, and they lobbed rockets into the machine gun nest to give the soldiers a fighting chance of making it onto the shore. Also had the unfortunate job that after the battle to fish out the bodies and bring them back to the main ship so they could be sent home. He spent 13 months in combat, ends up getting shot in the hand, which thankfully for us and him as a baseball player didn't hurt his baseball career. Didn't put into for the Purple Heart until he got home, because he didn't want to worry his mother. 13 months in combat that he rarely, if ever, spoke about, which I think is very common among people who saw what they saw in World War II. I'm sorry, I forgot the second thing you wanted me to talk about.
Steinbrenner, and then read page 307 about the declining skills.
Steinbrenner, I'll tell you what, Yogi was called a tranquility coach when in the late 70s and the early 80s, when it was the Bronx Zoo. And then in the 80s, I was a sports editor in Hartford. We covered the Yankees, and I had trouble hiring a Yankee writer because nobody wanted to be around that team. Because Steinbrenner was firing 2 and 3 managers a year, and he was trashing his players in the press every day. And finally decides at the end of 1983, he's going to ask Yogi to manage. And Yogi takes the job against the advice of everyone, especially his wife, who never wanted him to manage. He takes the job. The Tigers go 35-5 to basically end the pennant that early. He gets the second season from Steinbrenner. It goes all of 16 games. And Steinbrenner sends his general manager to fire him. At first, Yogi says, I'll be back because I want to see Dale play, because they had traded for Dale Berra in the offseason. Then realizes that this is not a man that he wants to be around, and vows he's never going to be back at Yankee Stadium. That lasted 14 years. In 1998, they build a museum in Montclair. And if everyone ever gets to Montclair, New Jersey, it's a beautiful little museum, kind of a miniature Hall of Fame designed by the same guy. And Steinbrenner comes to apologize to Yogi. And it's funny, he sent his driver to check out the route so he wouldn't be late. He ends up being late, and Yogi, who's always early to everything, is standing at the door waiting for Steinbrenner, who shows up, and Yogi is tapping his watch because Steinbrenner is 10 minutes late, and he goes, "You're late." And he goes, "Come on, Yogi, I came all the way from Florida." They go into a room with Carmen. Steinbrenner puts his hands on Yogi's shoulders, says, "The worst mistake I ever made in baseball was firing you the way I fired you." And Yogi said, "I made a lot of mistakes too." End of grudge. The two men end up becoming very close friends for the rest of Steinbrenner's life. Steinbrenner passes in 2010, I believe, before Yogi. But a complete turnaround from the adversarial relationship to one of very close friends. So you really don't want to embarrass me to read from my book, huh?
I found it lyrical. So, and maybe people will be rushing after they hear how well it's written. Now they've heard these great stories, they'll see it's also beautifully written. So let's go,
okay.
Please.
So, so the chapter 29 is 1962, 1963. There comes a time in every baseball player's career when he can no longer outrun his athletic mortality, when recovering from an injury takes weeks instead of days, when he can't catch up to a good fastball or pick up the spin on a curveball when it leaves the pitcher's hand, when fly balls he once caught drop in front of him or sail over his head, and his throws bounce once, maybe twice, before reaching the cutoff man. For Yogi, that time is 1962. Even though the season ends in another pennant and another World Series, Berra can't help but feel a bit embarrassed by what he does or doesn't do. He hits just 10 home runs and drives in 35 runs, both career lows. He bats a meager .224, a full 64 points below his career average. At 37 years old, Berra appears in 86 games, only 55 as a starter, by far the fewest of his 16 full seasons of his career. Sure, there are days when Yogi stops the hands of time. There's a pinch hit 3-run homer he slugged on June 9th, the one that put the Yankees ahead in the 7-3 win against the Orioles. It was Berra's 2000th game. Only Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth have played more games wearing a Yankee uniform.
Thank you. I love that. I love that. Beautiful.
Thank you.
So
My pleasure.
Kelsey, we can have some questions now if there are any, and you'll take over from here.
Yes, so if you have a question, please use the raise hand feature at the bottom of the Zoom app. If you're on video, you can give a wave of your arm, or you can put your question in the chat, and I'll make sure everyone gets a chance to speak.
Anybody? No questions? Kelsey, no questions?
I'm not seeing any. No one? If you're too shy, you can put it in the chat. I'm happy to ask for you.
So hearing no questions, let me thank John, thank Chris, and urge you both to favor your father, your husband, your grandfather with DADITUDE or YOGI. I hope you'll get both of them, get them at Chevalier's. Thank you, really.
Ooh, I'm going to cut in Bert real quick. We do have some questions. Last minute.
Go ahead.
Jules Potts, please.
You had mentioned that you were going to ask the author to read the Yogiisms at the end of the book.
Yes, at 439, just a few of them.
Great.
Piggyback off that, we've got a question in the chat that's wondering if those Yogi-isms were all his own, or was he fed the lines?
Well, Yogi was, like I said, one of my favorite Yogiisms was, I never said everything that I said. One of the people, there were, I think, he estimated that he said about 75, 80% of them, and that's probably a good assessment. One of the guys who kind of piggybacked on Yogiisms was Joe Garagiola, whose career ends at age 28 after an injury, and he becomes a announcer with the Cardinals, and he hits the banquet circuit, which some of us are old enough to remember what that is. I had to explain what that was to my young assistants. And he works his way up from that to becoming the host of the Today Show and the backup to Johnny Carson on the Tonight Show. And one of the threads that follow all the way through that is all the great stories he tells about his best friend, Yogi Berra. And he leans very heavily on the Yogiisms. And someone once asked him, Yogi, did he mind that Joe, some of the stories were not always the most complimentary to Yogi. And Yogi said, anything I can do for my best friend, I'll do. And that's kind of the way Yogi was. Okay, so on page 437, you say? Because I'm not seeing in Yogi.
439, and there are a bunch of those when he became a movie critic. I thought those were particularly funny.
Yogi loved movies. And another advertising guy ended up putting him into a commercial around Stroh's beers, where he would rate movies. And some of the things that he said, the guy sent me a thumb drive with him, were just hysterical. You could tell if Yogi was trying to be, be funny, and those didn't work when he was just himself. Of course, the first one he did was, I guess, Fatal Attraction, and he kept calling Glen Cove. And so much so that the guy had to cut it out of the commercial because he couldn't get it right. Okay, so he said, "Hey Yogi, what do you think of Cher in Moonstruck? She did a good job. She got the Golden Glove Award." Hey Yogi, what do you think of Biloxi Blues? It reminded me of being in the Army, even though I was in the Navy. Let's see, I'm kind of picking through here. They asked, these are all from the movie things. They said they asked him about the movie Fatal Attraction. Was it a thriller, Yogi? Yes, you should see the last 15 minutes of that movie. I couldn't even see it. Yogi, did you get scared? No, I didn't get scared, until it came to the part where you get scared. So this is kind of Yogi at his best. I mean, these are the Yogiisms from his movie days. I'm not finding the other ones. I think I've told you my favorites, and I'm kind of having a mental block on. I can't think of too many more. But if anyone
they're sprinkled throughout the book, so people who buy it and read it will be able to enjoy Yogiisms every few pages.
I will say this is a man who had an 8th grade education. The last 2 years of that education was at a trade school because Yogi really didn't care much for school. And with that, he is quoted 8 times in Bartlett's Book of Famous Quotations, which is more than any US president in history. So for a guy with a limited education, he knew how to turn a phrase.
Kelsey, another question?
We do. We've got a question from Warren Meislin. Warren, go for it.
Hi. Oh, thank you for picking me. You touched on it a little bit. I have so many questions, but I'll keep it to one. Why didn't the Mets give him more of a chance as a manager? I remember he had been, I'm from New Jersey originally. Most of my family are Yankee fans, but as a Met fan, he was a successful coach. And then when he became manager, why didn't they give him a little more of a chance? I think, did they fire him after 74?
Well, they skipped over him first for Wes Westrum, if you remember.
Right.
And Casey thought that he was doing Yogi a favor because that team was so bad that there was just no winning. And then when the Mets started to put it together, they had a chance to get Gil Hodges. Right. And Gil Hodges was, considered one of the best, if not the best manager of the game at that point. And they bring Hodges in, and Yogi walks in, and they were friends from their days when Hodges played for the Brooklyn Dodgers and Yogi played for the Yankees, and all those guys ended up being friends. And he was particularly friendly with Gil. But he walked in and said, "Listen, if you want to bring in all your own people, I'll leave." And Gil says, "No way. I sincerely want you to stay here." So he stayed, and unfortunately, in 1972, Hodges, right before the very first baseball strike, ends up having a heart attack at the, right before the team is, or management is flying back to New York, and they name Yogi manager, and in a terrible bit of public relations, he is named manager on the day of Gil Hodges' funeral. And they have the press conference in Shea Stadium, after the funeral, which was just a terrible idea. Yogi has 2 good seasons with the Mets in 73 and 74. In 72, and then 73 he takes them to the World Series, and they sign him to a 3-year deal. They bring in Willie Mays, which Yogi was against. Mays at that point was 42 and had really worn out his welcome in San Francisco, and they were very happy for him to leave, but really had trouble with Cleon Jones, who ended up getting into off the field problems. And then there was a confrontation in the dugout where Yogi told him to go out to play left field, and he refused. And Yogi finally drew the line and said, "It's either him or me. I can't have a player not play if I tell him to play." And that team was expected to do better. They were about 5 games over 500 after 100 games, 105 games actually, and they fired him. Yogi saw it coming, told his wife the night before, I'm going to get a call the next day, and sure enough, he did. And in a scene that I think stunned everyone on the Mets, he leaves he doesn't come back the next day, but the following day he's at Shea Stadium to say goodbye to every single player, and including Tom Seaver, who had openly campaigned for Yogi to be fired. And everyone just stopped watching him walk up to Seaver, and he shook Seaver's hand, thanked him for helping him get to World Series, and he's walking out, and Ed Kranepool is standing there talking to a writer, and he walks out, and Kranepool now is 30, but he's been in baseball for 10 years. And as Yogi kind of fades into the distance, he turns to the writer and he says, you know, Yogi's a great baseball man. He's just too nice a guy to be a manager. And, you know, that's kind of an odd thing to say, but it might have been true.
Chris, John, thank you. Thank you all for coming. It's now after 5 o'clock on the West Coast, 8 o'clock on the East Coast, and so everybody's entitled to a drink. So thanks,
Happy
everybody.
hour. Thanks, Bert. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Bert.
Bye, guys.
Thank you, Chris.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
It's a
everybody.
pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Totally delightful. Thank you.
Thanks, gang.
Thanks, everyone. We really appreciate being here.
My pleasure. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.